While my grandfather lay in the ICU fighting for every single breath, my own parents were busy draining $900,000 from the account I had saved to keep him alive. My sister stood there in her designer heels and actually smirked, saying, "We need that money more than a dying old man does." My father looked me dead in the eye and said he should just die and save us the trouble. And then bang, the front door flew open. My name is Keisha Vance, and at 32 years old, I thought I was the smartest person in the room. I am a forensic accountant in Chicago, which means I make my living hunting down white-collar criminals who think they can hide stolen money in complex ledgers. I catch liars for a living. But as I sat there in the dim light of my penthouse, looking at the empty wine glass in my hand, I realized the biggest liars were the ones sitting at my own dinner table. Before I tell you how I sent my entire family to federal prison using a single piece of paper, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. Trust me, you are going to want to hear how this ends. It was exactly 7:45 on a Tuesday night when my life fell apart. I was standing at the billing counter of St. Luke Private Hospital, the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee filling my nose. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing flicker that matched the pounding in my temples. My grandfather Otis had been rushed in with heart failure 3 hours prior. The doctors told me he needed an emergency valve replacement and immediate stabilization on an ECMO machine. The cost was astronomical, but I did not care. I had the money. Or so I thought. The billing coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Gable with kind eyes and a ruthlessly efficient demeanor, typed away at her computer. She looked up at me over her reading glasses and gave me a sympathetic smile. "Ms. Vance, we just need to process the initial deposit of $200,000 to clear the surgical team for the morning." I nodded, reaching into my purse. My hand did not shake. I was calm. I had spent 5 years building the Otis Family Trust Fund specifically for this moment. I handed her my platinum debit card, the heavy metal specifically designed for high-limit transactions. "Do it," I said, my voice steady. "Just save him." Mrs. Gable swiped the card. We waited in that awkward silence that only exists in hospitals and banks. Then came the sound, that sharp, jagged beep that cuts through the noise of a busy room. Declined. I frowned, confusion flooding my chest. "That is impossible," I said, trying to keep my voice low so the people in the waiting room would not hear. "There is nearly $1 million in that account. Try it again, please. It must be the chip reader." She swiped it again. Beep. Declined. Code 05. Insufficient funds. The air suddenly felt very thin. I could feel the heat rising up my neck. I am a professional. I manage millions of dollars for corporations. Having a card declined was a humiliation I had not experienced since college. But this was not about embarrassment. This was about the man upstairs whose heart was failing with every passing second. "I am calling the bank." I snapped, pulling out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen, dialing the private client direct line. I paced back and forth in the small lobby, my heels clicking aggressively against the linoleum floor. The hold music seemed to mock me, playing a cheerful jazz tune while my world teetered on the edge. Finally, a human voice answered. "Thank you for calling Private Wealth Management. This is David. How can I assist you, Ms. Vance?" "David, listen to me," I whispered, hissing into the phone. "I am at the hospital. My card was just declined. I need you to override whatever fraud block you put on it. This is a life or death medical expense." There was a pause on the other end, the clicking of a keyboard, then a silence that lasted too long. David's voice came back, but the professional warmth was gone, replaced by a hesitant confusion. "Ms. Vance, I am looking at the account ending in 4098. I do not see a fraud block." "Then why was it declined?" I demanded, watching Mrs. Gable look at the clock. She was losing patience. The surgeons were waiting. "Ms. Vance, the transaction was declined because the available balance is $42.16. I stopped pacing. The phone nearly slipped from my sweaty palm. "Excuse me, Did you say $42? Yes, Mom, David answered. That is impossible, I said, my voice rising, causing a security guard to look in my direction. There was $912,000 in that account this morning. I checked it myself. Where did it go? I could hear David typing furiously. Ma'am, I see a wire transfer initiated 2 hours ago at 5:30 p.m. The entire balance was liquidated and transferred to an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. Who authorized it? I screamed. I am the only trustee. I am the only one with the access codes. Who moved my money? Ms. Vance, the transfer was authorized using a power of attorney document on file. The system shows it was verified by a Mr. Desmond Vance. My knees actually gave out. I had to grab the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. Desmond Vance. My father. The room spun. I remembered 5 years ago, when I first set up the trust, I had listed my parents as emergency proxies in case something happened to me. I was young then. I still believed that despite their greed and their laziness, they would never actually hurt the man who gave them life. I had forgotten to revoke that document. David, freeze the account, I said, my voice shaking. That is theft. I cannot, Mom, David said gently. The power of attorney is valid. Legally, he has full access. I hung up the phone. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Mrs. Gable was looking at me with pity. That look was worse than the anger. It was the look you give a charity case. Is everything all right, Miss Vance? She asked softly. No, I whispered. No, it is not. I walked out of the hospital into the freezing Chicago night. The wind hit my face like a physical slap, but it was nothing compared to the rage burning in my gut. My grandfather was upstairs dying because my father decided he needed a payday. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was not going to cry. Tears were for victims. I was not a victim. I was an auditor. And I was about to conduct the most aggressive audit of my life. I walked past the stunned silence of the entry hall and into the living room. The air smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and the distinct metallic tang of fresh caviar. It was the smell of money. Specifically, it was the smell of my grandfather money. The room was filled with people I vaguely recognized. Friends of Brad, hangers-on, people who had never visited my grandfather in the hospital, but were more than happy to drink his liquor. On the mahogany sideboard, a buffet was spread out that must have cost $5,000 alone. But my eyes locked onto the center of the room. Brad was standing there holding a magnum bottle of Dom Perignon. He looked like he had just won the lottery. In a way, he had. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, and on his left wrist sat a brand-new Rolex Submariner. The blue dial caught the light. I knew exactly how much that watch cost. It was $15,000. That was the price of 3 days on the ECMO machine. My grandfather's life support was currently ticking away on the wrist of a man who had never worked an honest day in his life. I did not say a word. I walked straight to the high-end sound system my grandfather had bought to listen to his jazz records. A heavy bass beat was shaking the floorboards, rattling the family photos on the mantel. I reached behind the console, found the power cord, and yanked it out of the wall. The music cut out instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. A few guests cleared their throats. Someone dropped a fork. Brad let out a groan, throwing his head back in exaggerated annoyance. He stepped toward me, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. Seriously, Keisha, he said, his voice slurring slightly. You are such a buzzkill, every single time. We are having a moment here. Do not ruin the vibe. I looked at him. I looked at the watch. I looked at the champagne. Ruin the vibe! I repeated, my voice trembling with a cold fury I had never felt before. My grandfather is lying in a hospital bed with a failing heart. The doctors are waiting for a deposit to save his life. A deposit you stole. And you are talking about the vibe. Brad laughed. He actually laughed. He turned to his friends and gestured at me with the champagne bottle. See what I mean, guys, he said. This is my sister-in-law. Always the drama queen. Always making everything about her. He turned back to me, his expression hardening. Look, Keisha. Nobody stole anything. We reallocated assets. That is a business term. You wouldn't understand. We are celebrating the launch of my new venture, the Prestige Auto Spa chain. That money was just sitting in that account collecting dust. It was dead capital. I am putting it to work. You committed wire fraud, I said, stepping into his personal space. You used a power of attorney under false pretenses to drain a medical trust fund. That is a federal crime, Brad. Oh, stop it! My mother's voice cut through the air. I turned to see Brenda standing up from the sofa. She was wearing a silk dress I had never seen before. Another purchase. She walked over to us, swirling her drink, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. You are embarrassing yourself, Keisha, she said. We are family. What is mine is yours, and what is your grandfather is ours. He would want us to be happy. He would want Brad to succeed. You know how much he loved entrepreneurship. He is not dead yet, I screamed. My voice finally broke, snapping under the weight of their delusion. He is alive. He is conscious. And he needs that money to stay that way. My sister Tanisha sighed loudly, picking at her nails. She was sitting in grandfather's favorite leather armchair, her feet propped up on the ottoman. Keisha, let us be real, she said without even looking at me. Grandpa is 75. He has had a good run. Even if they do the surgery, what does he have left? A few years? Maybe 5. Is it really worth throwing nearly $1 million into a sinking ship? I stared at her. My own sister. The girl I had protected from bullies in high school. The girl I had helped with her college applications. So you are deciding who lives and dies now, I asked. You are playing God because you want to buy handbags and fund your husband's imaginary business. We need that money more than he does, Tanisha said, looking up at me with defiant eyes. We have a future, Keisha. Brad has a vision. We have bills. We have a life to live. Grandpa is basically a vegetable. Keeping him alive is just selfish on your part. You just want to keep control. You want to be the hero. The room felt like it was spinning. This was not just greed. This was sociopathy. They had justified this theft so completely in their minds that I was the villain for trying to stop it. They had held a funeral for a living man just so they could split his estate early. I looked at my father, Desmond. He was sitting in the corner, avoiding my gaze. He was the one who signed the papers. He was the one who betrayed his own father. Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Tell them. Tell them to send the money back. We have maybe 8 hours. Desmond took a long sip of his scotch. He looked tired. He looked weak. But when he finally looked at me, his eyes were cold. Your mother is right, Keisha, he mumbled. It is done. The money is invested. We cannot just pull it back. Brad says the returns will be huge. We will pay the hospital later. Maybe next week. Next week, I repeated. He will be dead by morning without that surgery. He shrugged, a small, pathetic motion. Then it is God will. God will. That was the moment. That was the exact second the last thread of attachment I had to these people snapped. It didn't break. It incinerated. I looked around the room at the guests who were now awkwardly checking their phones, pretending not to hear the family destroying itself. I realized then that screaming was useless. Logic was useless. Appeals to morality were useless because these people had no morals. They only understood one thing: power. And right now they thought they had it all. I took a deep breath. I smoothed down the front of my coat. I forced my face into a mask of calm. If I was going to beat them, I could not be the hysterical daughter. I had to be the forensic accountant. I had to be the predator. Fine, I said. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. Brad blinked. Wait, what? I said fine, I repeated. I reached over and took the champagne bottle from his hand. He was too shocked to stop me. I poured myself a glass. Maybe you are right, I said, raising the glass. I took a sip. It was cold and crisp. Grandpa always loved Dom Perignon. I looked at Tanisha. You are right. He is old, and surgery is risky. Maybe I am just being emotional. My mother let out a loud exhale, her shoulders dropping. Oh, thank God, Keisha. I knew you would come around. I knew you would see reason. We are doing this for the family. For all of us. For the family, I echoed. Brad grinned, clapping his hands together. See? I told you she would get it. Welcome to the ground floor of the next big thing, Keisha. You won't regret this. I smiled. It was a tight, sharp smile. The kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. I am sure I won't, I said. But if we are going to do this, if we are going to let nature take its course with Grandpa, I need to know the plan. I am an accountant, remember? If this is an investment, I need to see the paperwork. I need to make sure we are protected from taxes. Taxes? Brad asked, his eyes widening. Yes, taxes. I lied smoothly. If the IRS sees $1 million transfer, they will take 40%. Unless we structure it as a business loan or a gift investment. You did think of that, right, Brad? Brad looked at my father. My father looked at my mother. Panic flickered in their eyes. Of course they hadn't thought of that. They were amateurs. I set the glass down. Look, I can fix it. I can make sure we keep every penny. But I need you to sign some things, just to make it official, to keep the government out of our pockets. My mother beamed. She rushed over and hugged me. The scent of her expensive perfume made me want to gag. That is my brilliant girl, always looking out for us. I hugged her back. My arms felt like wood. Yes, Mom, I whispered. I am looking out for exactly who deserves it. I pulled away. Enjoy the party, I said. I will go draft the papers. We will sign them in the morning. I turned and walked out of the house. I did not look back at the Rolex. I did not look back at my sister's smirk. I walked out into the cold night air and pulled out my phone. My hands were finally steady. I dialed a number I had not used in years. It rang twice. Hello, a deep voice answered. Voice. Mr. Henderson, I said. It is Keisha Vance. I need you to meet me at the diner on 4th Street. Bring your notary seal, and bring everything you have on the RICO statutes. Why, the lawyer asked, his voice thick with sleep. Because I said, opening my car door, I'm about to help my parents confess to a felony, and I want to make sure the ink is dry before they realize they just signed their own arrest warrants. I got into the car. The digital clock on the dashboard read 9:15. I had lost the battle for the money. But the war had just begun, and unlike them, I was willing to burn everything down to win. I stood in the center of the kitchen island the next morning feeling like a prisoner in the home where I grew up. My mother was pacing back and forth, her silk robe trailing behind her like a royal train. My father sat at the table nursing a coffee refusal written all over his face. The air in the room felt heavy and suffocating, as if the walls were slowly closing in on me. I slammed the file folder down on the granite counter so hard that my father's coffee mug jumped. Read it, I said, my voice tight with exhaustion. Just read the damn paper, Dad. Desmond looked away, refusing to make eye contact. I do not need to read your negative propaganda, Keisha. We know what we are doing. I opened the folder myself, forcing them to look at the undeniable truth printed in black and white. It was a background check on their beloved son-in-law. Brad is not a businessman, I said, pointing at the highlighted rows. He is a con artist. Look at this. He filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 3 times in the last 6 years. He has 2 active lawsuits against him for fraud in Florida. He owes the IRS $60,000. This isn't a startup investor. This is a man who is drowning, and he is using Grandpa money as a life raft. My mother stopped pacing. She walked over to me, her face twisted into a mask of disappointment. But she wasn't disappointed in Brad. She was disappointed in me. You are so jealous, she hissed. You have always been jealous of Tanisha. You cannot stand to see her happy, can you? You cannot stand that she found a man who dreams big while you sit in your little office counting other people's pennies. I stared at her in disbelief. Jealous. I own my own penthouse. I have a savings account that I built myself. Tanisha has to ask her husband for permission to buy a latte. Mom, this isn't about jealousy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is about facts. Brad lied to you. He promised you double returns on an investment that does not exist. There is no prestige auto spa chain. I checked the business registry. The company was formed yesterday. Yesterday, Mom. It is a shell company. Brenda laughed a dry, harsh sound that made my skin crawl. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. The camera in my mind felt like it was spinning, orbiting around this toxic dynamic, making me dizzy. You think you are so smart, Keisha, she said, poking me in the chest with a manicured finger. You think because you went to college and got that fancy job, you are better than us. You look down on your father. You look down on me. I never said that, I protested. You did not have to say it, Brenda shouted. We feel it. We feel your judgment every time you come here. You think we are stupid? Well, let me tell you something, little girl. We are the ones who raised you. I carried you in my body for 9 months. I tore my body apart to bring you into this world, and this is how you repay me. By trying to destroy your sister's chance at a good life. By calling the police on your own flesh and blood. You are cold, Keisha. You are ice cold. She was good. I had to give her that. She knew exactly where to stick the knife. She knew that deep down every child just wants their mother approval. She was weaponizing my own biology against me. Dad, please, I said, turning to him, desperate for 1 ounce of logic. You worked in logistics for 30 years. You know how numbers work. Look at the balance sheet. Brad took $900,000. Even if this business was real, startup costs are nowhere near that high. He is pocketing the money. Desmond finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who was trying to convince himself of a lie, because the truth was too painful to bear. Brad is a good man, Keisha, he said, his voice trembling. He is sophisticated. He knows how the world works. He told us that in his world, you have to spend money to make money. He said he is going to turn that 900,000 into 2 million by Christmas. And you believe him, I asked. Over me. Over the daughter who has managed your taxes for a decade. My mother stepped in between us, shielding her husband like a guard dog. We believe in his vision, Brenda declared. And yes, we believe him because he is a man who knows how to take charge, unlike you who just wants to hoard everything. Grandpa Money was sitting there doing nothing. It was sinful to let it sit there when the family needed it. We only borrowed it, Keisha. It is an advance on what is rightfully ours. It is not yours, I snapped, losing my temper. It belongs to Otis, and he is dying. He is 80 years old, Brenda screamed back. He has lived his life. Why should he sit on a pile of cash while we struggle? Brad is going to save this family. He is going to put us in the country club. He is going to get us the respect we deserve. I looked at them and suddenly it all made sense. It wasn't just greed. It was status. They loved Brad because he was white. They loved him because he represented a ticket into a world they felt excluded from. They were willing to overlook the bankruptcy, the lies, and the obvious fraud because he looked the part of the wealthy, successful businessman. They were so desperate for that validation that they were willing to let my grandfather die to keep the fantasy alive. I closed the folder. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of a coroner calling a time of death. The relationship was dead. There was no saving it. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, what my mother asked, suspicious of my sudden surrender. Okay, I said, backing away toward the door. You have made your choice. You chose the fantasy. But remember this moment, Mom. Remember that I gave you a chance. I brought you the proof. I tried to save you. Save us. Brenda scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Go back to your lonely apartment, Keisha. Leave the business to the adults. I walked out of the kitchen. I could hear them muttering to each other, reassuring themselves that I was just a bitter, hateful daughter. They had no idea that I wasn't leaving to go home. I was leaving to go to the district attorney office. They wanted to talk about an advance on their inheritance. Well, I was about to give them an advance on their karma. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the hospital. A nurse I knew. The message was short, but it made my blood run cold. Your parents were just here. They signed the DNR. They are pulling the plug tonight at midnight. I stared at the screen. The argument in the kitchen had been a distraction. While Brenda was gaslighting me about being a bad daughter, Desmond must have called the hospital to finalize the order. They weren't just thieves. They were executioners. I threw the car into gear. I had played nice. I had tried logic. Now it was time for war. I dialed Henderson's number again. "It is me," I said as soon as he picked up. "Forget the slow play. Forget the trap. They are killing him tonight. We need to move now." I heard the rustle of papers on the other end. Henderson's voice was grim. "Meet me at the courthouse, Keisha. We are going to get an emergency injunction. And Keisha." "Yes. Bring the bankruptcy papers. We are going to need everything." I sped out of the driveway, leaving the house that was no longer a home behind me. The camera in my mind stopped spinning. The focus was razor sharp. Target locked. I was coming for them. The drive back to St. Luke Hospital was a blur of red taillights and blinding street lamps. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the ticking clock in my head. I had left the House of Wolves only to return to a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary but felt more like a tomb. I parked the car illegally in the emergency bay, not caring about the ticket or the tow truck. I ran through the automatic doors, the blast of sterile air hitting my face. The hospital at night was a different world. It was quieter, but the silence was heavy. It was the silence of people waiting for bad news. I sprinted toward the ICU unit, my heels clicking loudly on the linoleum floor. The nurse at the station looked up, startled by my entrance. It was Marlene, a veteran nurse who had known my grandfather for years. She had been there when he was admitted 3 days ago, holding his hand while I cried. But tonight Marlene did not smile. She did not wave me over. She looked down at her charts, avoiding my eyes. "Where is he?" I demanded, leaning over the high counter. "Is he prepped for surgery?" "I am getting the money. The lawyers are handling the injunction." Marlene finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked like she had been crying. "Keisha," she whispered. "You need to talk to Dr. Evans." "Why?" I asked, my stomach dropping. Did something happen? Did he code? "Just wait here, honey," Marlene said, her voice trembling. I did not wait. I pushed past the station and headed straight for Dr. Evans' office. The door was open. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a tablet, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He looked up as I barged in. Dr. Evans was a good man. He was a brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon who had saved hundreds of lives. But in that moment, he looked defeated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Vance," he said softly. "Please sit down." "I do not want to sit down," I snapped. "I want to know why Marlene looks like she is at a funeral. I want to know why my grandfather is not being prepped for the OR. Dr. Evans sighed. He stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge. He crossed his arms not in a defensive way, but in a way that suggested he was trying to hold himself together. "Your parents were here, Keisha," he said, "about an hour ago, along with your sister and her husband." "I know," I said. "I saw the text. What did they do?" Dr. Evans picked up a clipboard from the desk. He hesitated for a second before handing it to me. "They invoked their rights as primary guardians under the state next of kin laws," he explained. "Since you do not hold a medical power of attorney, only a financial one, your father, Desmond Vance, has the final say in all medical decisions regarding Otis Vance." I looked at the document on the clipboard. It was a standard hospital form. The letters seemed to swim before my eyes. DNR. Do not resuscitate. DNI. Do not intubate. And at the bottom, in my father's shakily scrawled signature, was the authorization to withdraw life support. "They signed a death warrant," I whispered. My hands were shaking so hard the clipboard rattled against the desk. "They claimed that Otis would not want to live this way." Dr. Evans said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. They told the ethics board that keeping him on the machines was cruel. They painted a picture of a man who was suffering with no quality of life. "He is conscious," I screamed, throwing the clipboard onto the chair. "You told me he squeezed your hand. You told me his brain activity is normal. He is just weak. He just needs the valve repair." "I know that," Dr. Evans said quietly. "And you know that. But legally, my hands are tied." The ethics committee reviewed the case based on the family testimony. Without the funds for the surgery, and with the family refusing consent for further intervention, we are required by law to follow the palliative care protocol. "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It means," Dr. Evans said, looking me dead in the eye, "that at midnight tonight, we have to turn off the ECMO machine. We have to remove the ventilator. And we have to let nature take its course." Midnight. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30. I had 90 minutes. 90 minutes before they murdered him. "This is not about mercy," I said, tears finally spilling over. "This is about money. They stole the surgery funds, Dr. Evans. They spent it. They need him dead, so they can cash out the estate and cover their tracks. If he wakes up and recovers, he can press charges. They are killing him to stay out of prison." "I believe you," Dr. Evans said. "I have been doing this for 30 years, Keisha. I know the look of a grieving family, and I know the look of vultures. Your family did not look sad. They looked impatient. But belief is not evidence. Unless you can produce a court order overriding your father's authority, I cannot touch that machine. If I do, I lose my license, and the hospital gets sued for millions." I felt the room spinning. The walls were closing in on me. The air felt too thin to breathe. I was a forensic accountant. I dealt with facts, figures, and paper trails. I could trace a hidden bank account in the Cayman Islands. I could find a tax loophole in a 1,000-page document. But I could not fight this. I could not fight a signature on a piece of paper that gave my father the legal right to kill his own father. I backed out of the office. I stumbled into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a cold, indifferent sound. I walked down the corridor toward room 304, my grandfather's room. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. The room was dark, lit only by the blinking lights of the monitors. The rhythmic whooshing sound of the ventilator filled the space. It was the sound of life being forced into a body that was too tired to fight alone. I walked to the bedside. Otis Vance looked small in the bed. He was a big man, a man who had started driving trucks when he was 18 and built a logistics empire with nothing but grit and determination. He had hands the size of dinner plates. Now those hands were pale and still connected to IV lines and pulse ox sensors. I reached out and took his hand. It was warm. "I am so sorry, Grandpa," I whispered. "I failed you. I thought I was smart. I thought I had everything protected. But I didn't protect you from them." I pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. I laid my head on the mattress near his hand. The tears came then hot and fast, soaking into the hospital sheets. I cried for the grandfather who had taught me how to ride a bike. I cried for the man who had paid for my college when my parents said it was a waste of money. I cried for the loneliness of being the only person in this family who actually loved him. I felt completely hollowed out. This was the bottom. This was the moment where the villain wins. My parents were probably popping another bottle of champagne right now, toasting to their victory. They had the money, they had the house, and in 90 minutes they would have the body. I closed my eyes, listening to the beep 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 of the heart monitor. It was a countdown. Each beep was a second stolen from death. Suddenly I felt a twitch. At first I thought it was my imagination, a spasm caused by my own trembling hands. But then I felt it again, a distinct squeeze. I lifted my head. I looked at his hand. His fingers were curled around mine, not loosely, tightly. I looked up at his face. His eyes were still closed. The tube in his throat made it impossible for him to speak. But then his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened. His eyes were cloudy with medication, but they were focused. He was looking right at me. "Grandpa." I gasped, standing up. Can you hear me? He blinked once. Yes. Do you know what is happening? I asked, my voice choking with emotion. Do you know what they did? He blinked again. Stronger this time. I looked at the clock. 10:45. I had an hour and 15 minutes. I squeezed his hand back. I am not going to let them do this, I said fiercely. I do not care what the law says. I do not care about the money. I will burn this whole hospital down if I have to. Otis Vance stared at me, and then slowly he moved his index finger. He pointed toward the bedside table. I frowned. I looked at the table. There was nothing there but a plastic pitcher of water, a box of tissues, and his personal effects bag. I reached for the bag. Is this it? I asked. He blinked. I opened the bag. Inside was his wallet, his watch, and his old flip phone. He refused to use a smartphone, saying they were for people with nothing to do. I pulled out the phone. It was off. I turned it on, waiting impatiently for the screen to light up. What is it, Grandpa? I asked. What do you want me to see? He moved his finger again. A tiny motion, tapping against the mattress. Tap, 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 recording. He was miming hitting a record button. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the phone. I opened the voice memo app. There was one file saved. It was dated 3 days ago. The timestamp was 2 hours before his cardiac arrest. I pressed play. The sound was grainy, at first the sound of a phone shifting in a pocket. And then I heard voices. Clear as day. It was my father's voice. Just sign the papers, Dad. We know you are tired. Just sign the transfer and you can rest. And then my grandfather's voice, weak but defiant. I am not signing anything, Desmond. That money is for the business. It is for Keisha's future. You will gamble it away in a week. Then came the sound of a struggle, a crash, the sound of heavy breathing. And then my mother's voice, cold and sharp. He is clutching his chest, Desmond. He is having an attack. Do not give him the pills. What came next made my blood freeze in my veins. I heard the sound of my grandfather gasping for air, wheezing, begging. My pills, he choked out. No, Brenda's voice said. Not until you sign. If you want the medicine, you sign the check. There was a long, agonizing silence filled only with the sound of a man fighting for his life, and then the sound of a pen scratching on paper. There, Desmond said. We got it. Let us go. What about the pills? Brenda asked. Leave them, Desmond answered. He is gone anyway. Let us call 911 in 10 minutes. It will look like natural causes. The recording ended. I stood there in the semi-dark hospital room, the phone clutching in my hand like a weapon. They hadn't just stolen the money. They hadn't just neglected him. They had induced his heart attack. They had withheld his medication. This wasn't passive. This wasn't letting nature take its course. This was attempted murder. I looked down at my grandfather. A tear slid down his weathered cheek. He had recorded it. He had known they would come for him, and he had been ready. I wiped my own tears away. The sadness was gone. The helplessness was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel. I looked at the clock. 10:55. I had 65 minutes. I did not need an injunction. I did not need a civil lawsuit. I needed the police. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. Hold on, I whispered. Just hold on one more hour. The cavalry is coming. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't run this time. I walked with the steady, purposeful stride of an executioner. I pulled out my phone and dialed Henderson's number. Keisha, he answered. We are filing the paperwork, but the judge is at home. It is going to take time. Forget the judge, I said, walking past the nurse's station, my eyes fixed on the exit. What do you mean, forget the judge? Henderson asked. I have evidence, I said. I have a recording. It is not a civil case anymore, Henderson. Call the district attorney, call the FBI, and tell them to meet me at the Vance estate. Keisha, what are you going to do? Henderson asked, his voice alarmed. I pushed through the automatic doors into the cold night air. I am going to catch a killer, I said. And then I hung up. The game had changed, and I was about to play the final card. I pulled my car into the cracked asphalt lot of the Starlight Diner on the south side of Chicago. It was 2 in the morning. The neon sign above the door flickered with a buzzing sound that set my teeth on edge, casting a sickly blue light over the few cars parked there. This was the place where my grandfather Otis did his best thinking. It was where he planned his first trucking route 40 years ago, and it was where I was about to plan the destruction of my own family. I walked inside. The diner smelled of grease-old coffee and stale cigarette smoke. In the back booth sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Attorney Marcus Henderson. He was wearing a trench coat over his pajamas, and his bald head shone under the harsh overhead lights. He was 70 years old, the same age as my grandfather, and he had been Otis' best friend since they were in the army together. I slid into the booth across from him. I did not say hello. I slammed the recording on the table. "We have them, Henderson," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I have a recording. They withheld his medication. They coerced a signature. This is attempted murder. We need to call the police right now." Henderson looked at the phone. Then he looked at me. He did not reach for it. He did not look surprised. He just signaled the waitress to pour me a cup of coffee. "Drink," he said. "I do not want coffee," I snapped, pushing the mug away. "I want justice. Did you hear me? They are killing him at midnight. We have less than an hour." "They are not going to kill him," Henderson said calmly, taking a slow sip of his own coffee. "How can you be so sure?" I demanded. "They signed the DNR. They have the legal authority." "Because," Henderson said, setting his cup down with a deliberate clink. "Otis is not in a coma, Keisha." I froze. The noise of the diner seemed to fade away. "What did you say?" "He is awake," Henderson said. "He has been awake for 2 days. Not fully. The doctors say his heart is weak, and he drifts in and out. But he is lucid for about 30 minutes every day." I felt my mouth fall open. "But the doctors. Dr. Evans said he was unresponsive." "Dr. Evans is following Otis' orders." Henderson said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Your grandfather is a stubborn old mule, Keisha. When he first woke up, he saw your mother going through his wallet. He saw your father talking to the bankers on the phone. He realized what was happening. So he decided to play possum. He wanted to see how far they would go." I sank back against the vinyl booth. "He knows," I whispered. "He knows they stole the money. He knows everything," Henderson confirmed. "He heard the party. He heard the insults. He heard you trying to fight for him. He told Dr. Evans to keep the machines running, but to make it look like he was fading. He wanted to buy time. Buy time for what I asked. To see if you were strong enough to take over the empire," Henderson said. "And tonight, when you stormed out of that hospital room ready to burn the world down, you proved you were." Tears pricked my eyes again, but I blinked them away. "So what do we do? Do we reveal he is awake? Do we stop the DNR?" "No," Henderson said, his voice turning hard. "If we reveal he is awake now, they will just claim it was a misunderstanding. They will say they were acting in his best interest. They will give the money back, apologize, and in 6 months they will try again." "Otis does not want an apology, Keisha. He wants a purge." He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Otis sent me a message. He said do not save him with the money. Use the money to trap them. He said he is willing to risk dying tonight if it means cutting the cancer out of this family once and for all." I looked at the old lawyer. I saw the steel in his spine. This was the generation that built things to last. They did not do half measures. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "What is the plan?" Henderson pulled a file from his briefcase. It was thick. "You mentioned a tax strategy to them earlier," Henderson said. "You told them you could structure the theft as a gift investment to avoid taxes." "Yes," I said. "It was a bluff. I just wanted them to sign something admitting they took the cash." "It is not a bluff anymore," Henderson said, sliding a document across the table. This is a legitimate structure for a family-limited partnership. If they sign this, they are acknowledging that the $900,000 was not a gift but a loan from the trust aimed at a specific business venture. I looked at the document. I do not understand. If we make it a loan, we are legitimizing the theft. Read paragraph 4, Henderson said, pointing with a thick finger. I read it. The legal jargon was dense, but my accountant brain translated it instantly. Representations and warranties. The borrower hereby certifies under penalty of perjury that the funds will be used exclusively for the business operations listed in Schedule A. Any personal use of said funds constitutes immediate default and federal wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343. I looked up at Henderson. Schedule A is empty. Exactly, Henderson said. You are going to go back there. You are going to tell them you fixed the tax problem. You are going to ask them to list exactly what they bought with the money. Every car, every party, every watch. You tell them you need to list it as a business expense to write it off. I smiled. A cold, slow smile. And once they write it down and sign it, they have confessed to federal fraud. Henderson finished. They are admitting in writing that they used trust funds for personal gain while claiming it was for a business. That is 10 years in prison. Minimum. And the DNRI asked. Henderson checked his watch. Dr. Evans will stall them. He will claim a technicality with the paperwork until you get that signature. Once you have the signature, you text me. I will walk into that house with the FBI. I looked at the document. It was a honey trap, a trap baited with their own greed. They were so desperate to keep the money and avoid taxes that they would sign their own death warrants. One more thing, Henderson said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Otis told me to give you this. I opened the box. Inside was his signet ring. The gold ring with the Vance family crest that he had worn every day of my life. He said the head of the family needs to look the part, Henderson said softly. I took the ring out. It was heavy. I slipped it onto my thumb because it was too big for my finger. It felt cold, but it also felt right. It felt like armor. I stood up. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I wasn't just a granddaughter anymore. I was the CEO of a takedown. I will get the signatures, I said. I know you will, Henderson said, raising his coffee cup in a silent toast. Give them hell, Keisha. I walked out of the diner and back into the night. The air was freezing, but I didn't feel it. I got into my car and looked at the ring on my hand. I am coming for you, I whispered to the empty car. And this time, I am not bringing a checkbook. I am bringing handcuffs. I started the engine and drove back toward the house where my family was waiting for me, waiting to celebrate their victory. Little did they know they were about to celebrate their own funeral. The driveway lights of the Vance estate were blazing as I pulled my car back up to the house. It had been less than an hour since I stormed out, but in that time I had transformed from a hysterical daughter into a cold-blooded operative. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry. My expression was neutral. I touched the heavy gold signet ring on my thumb for courage. It was showtime. I walked into the house. The party had died down. The guests had left, leaving behind a mess of empty champagne bottles and half-eaten canapes. My family was gathered in the living room like a pack of lions digesting a kill. Brad was lying on the sofa with his feet up, swirling a glass of scotch. My mother was counting cash from a stack on the table. My father was staring blankly at the television. They looked up as I entered. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Back for round 2, Brad asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Or did you come to beg for a loan? I did not take the bait. I walked to the center of the room and set my briefcase down on the coffee table. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump slightly. I needed to look defeated. I needed them to believe they had broken me. I came to apologize, I said softly. The room went silent. My mother stopped counting. Brad sat up. Even my father looked away from the TV. "Excuse me," Brad said, cupping his ear theatrically. "I do not think I heard that right." "I said I am sorry," I repeated, forcing myself to look him in the eye. "I went for a drive. I cooled off. And I realized you were right. Right about what Tanisha asked walking in from the kitchen with a bowl of ice cream. About everything I lied. About Grandpa. About the money." I called my accountant friend. We ran the numbers on the estate. I paused, letting the silence stretch out. I needed them to ask. I needed them to be the ones who invited the trap into their lives. And my father asked. And I realized that if we let the money sit in the trust until Grandpa dies, we are going to lose almost half of it, I said. "What do you mean half?" Brad snapped, sitting up straighter. "It is the death tax," I explained, using the term I knew would trigger their greed. The federal estate tax combined with the state inheritance tax. Plus, since the trust was set up for medical use, if the beneficiary dies with a positive balance, the IRS treats the remainder as taxable income at the highest bracket. We are looking at 40%, maybe 45. I watched the color drain from Brad's face. He was a man who thought he knew everything about money, but he knew nothing about wealth preservation. 40%, he choked out. That is nearly $400,000. Exactly, I said, shaking my head sadly. If we leave it alone, the government takes a huge chunk. But Brad was right. If we move the money out before he dies, if we reclassify it, we can save it. I saw the greed ignite in my mother's eyes. She stood up and walked over to me, her hostility replaced by a desperate curiosity. "Reclassify it how?" she asked. "We turn it into a gift investment," I said, opening my briefcase. I pulled out the document Henderson had given me. It looked impressive. Thick cream-colored paper, legal jargon, gold stamps. It looked like salvation. I told my lawyer that Brad had a legitimate business plan, I said, lying through my teeth. I told him that this wasn't theft. It was a pre-approved seed round for the Prestige Auto Spa. Brad puffed out his chest. "Exactly. That is what I have been saying. It is seed capital." "Right," I said. "So if we document it as a business transaction occurring before the death of the grantor, we bypass the estate tax completely. It becomes a business asset, not an inheritance. Tax-free." "Tax-free." Brad repeated, a smile spreading across his face. I like the sound of that. But I continued. "There is a catch. To make it legal so the IRS does not audit us, we need to be very specific. We need a paper trail. We need to document that you received the funds and that you have full control over them." I slid the document across the table toward them. "This is a receipt of funds and allocation agreement," I explained. "It basically says that you, Desmond Vance, as the power of attorney, authorized the transfer, and you, Brad and Tanisha, as the recipients, accept the money for your business." I pointed to the blank lines on Schedule A. "And here's the important part," I said. "To prove this is a real business, we need to list some immediate expenses. The IRS wants to see that the capital is being deployed. So all those things you bought today, the champagne, the watch, the party, we need to list them here as executive startup costs." Brad frowned slightly. "Can we do that? Put a Rolex on a business expense." I laughed a soft, conspiratorial laugh. "Brad, come on! You are the CEO. Image is everything. Of course it is a business expense. Marketing, networking. But we have to write it down. If it is undocumented, it is suspicious. If it is on this paper, it is legitimate." Brad looked at Tanisha. Tanisha looked at Mom. They were nodding. They were buying it. They were so terrified of losing 40% to the taxman that they were walking right into a federal prison cell. My father was the only one hesitating. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking. "Keisha, are you sure about this?" he asked. "This seems formal." "It has to be formal, Dad," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "We are talking about almost $1 million. Do you want to give half of it to the government, or do you want to keep it in the family?" My mother put her hand on his shoulder. "Sign it, Desmond. Do not be a coward. Keisha is trying to help us. She finally came to her senses. Desmond looked at me one last time. I saw the guilt in his eyes, but it was weak. It was weaker than his fear of his wife. He put the pen to the paper and signed. I watched the ink dry, one down. Now you, Brad, I said, sliding the paper to him. You are the beneficiary. You need to sign to accept the funds and the liability. Liability? Brad asked, pausing. Liability for the taxes. I corrected quickly. It means you promise to pay the taxes on the profit you make, not on the initial money. Oh, right, Brad said, laughing. Standard stuff. He grabbed the pen. He didn't just sign, he flourished. He wrote his name big and bold. Bradley J. Cunningham, CEO. Now list the expenses, I commanded gently. Everything you spent today, be accurate. The more you list, the less tax you pay. I watched in silent fascination as he wrote it all down. Rolex Submariner, $15,000. Catering and event, hosting $5,000. Porsche lease down payment, $8,000. Cash withdrawals, $20,000. He was literally writing a confession. He was documenting exactly how he had embezzled funds from a medical trust for personal luxury items. Every line was a separate count of fraud. Every item was a nail in his coffin. There he said, sitting back and admiring his work. That covers most of it. Perfect, I said, reaching out and taking the document. I kept my hand steady as I slid it back into my briefcase. I felt the weight of it. It was heavier than the signet ring. It was the weight of justice. I will file this with the county clerk in the morning, I said, standing up. That will lock in the tax exemption. My mother walked over and hugged me. It was a stiff, awkward hug, but she was smiling. I knew you were a smart girl, Keisha, she said. I knew you would not let us down. We are going to be so rich. Brad says the business will be worth $10 million in 2 years. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me and then discarded me for a golden child sister. I am sure it will be unforgettable, Mom, I said. Brad raised his glass. To the Vance Empire, he toasted. And to Keisha for finally getting on board. To the Empire, I said. I turned to leave. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. I had to get out of there. I had to get this document to Henderson before I threw up. Where are you going? Tanisha asked. Stay for a drink. We are celebrating. I cannot, I said, checking my watch. It was 11:30. I have to go to the hospital. The room went quiet again. Why? My father asked. It is almost midnight, Keisha. You know what is going to happen. I know, I said, turning back to face them one last time. I just want to say goodbye. You guys stay here. Celebrate. Enjoy the money. I will handle the hard part. My mother nodded, looking relieved that she didn't have to watch her own father die. You are a good daughter, Keisha. You are doing the right thing. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob. Goodbye, Mom, I whispered. I walked out into the cold night air. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, I ran. I sprinted to my car, clutching the briefcase to my chest. I threw it in the passenger seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to start the car. But as the engine roared to life, a scream tore out of my throat. It wasn't a scream of fear, it was a scream of victory. I had them. I had their signatures. I had the itemized list of stolen goods. I peeled out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the pavement. I grabbed my phone and voice commanded a text to Henderson. Package secured. I am headed to the hospital. Bring the cavalry. I looked at the digital clock. 11:45. I had 15 minutes to get to the hospital, 15 minutes to stop the doctors, 15 minutes to watch the look on my family face when the FBI kicked down their door. They thought they had just avoided a tax bill. They had no idea they had just signed a lease on a prison cell. The trap was sprung. Now it was time to close the jaws. The next 48 hours were a test of endurance, not for my body, but for my soul. I had to watch the people who stole my grandfather's life savings dance on his grave while he was still breathing. To make the trap work, I could not just be passive. I had to be complicit. I had to make them feel so safe and so powerful that they would lower their guard completely. Brad took my submission as an invitation to treat me like a servant. The morning after the signing, he called me at 6 a.m. He did not say hello. He just barked orders into the phone. Keisha, get over here. Since you are the company accountant now, you can drive me to my meetings. I need to focus on big picture strategy, and I cannot be distracted by traffic. I put on my most professional suit, pinned a smile on my face, and drove to the estate. When I arrived, Brad threw his car keys at me. They hit me in the chest and fell to the gravel. He did not apologize. He just stood there adjusting the cuffs of his $5,000 suit, waiting for me to pick them up. Pick them up, Keisha, he said, checking his reflection in the car window. And try not to scratch the leather when you drive. This is a CEO vehicle now. I picked up the keys. I gripped them tight enough to leave indentations in my palm. Every fiber of my being wanted to throw them into the woods, but I forced myself to breathe. I opened the door for him. Where to, Brad? I asked. The marina, he said. We need a venue for the launch party. The house is too small for the vision I have. I drove him to the Chicago Yacht Club. Brad sat in the back seat of his own car talking loudly on the phone to nobody pretending to close million-dollar deals. I turned on the voice recorder app on my phone and slipped it into the cup holder. When we arrived at the marina, Brad walked straight past the front desk and demanded to see the most expensive vessel available for charter. The sales manager, a man who smelled a commission a mile away, took us to a 100-foot yacht named the Sovereign. It had 3 decks, a jacuzzi, and a full-service bar. It cost $25,000 for a single night. Brad walked around the deck, running his hands over the teak wood like he owned it. This will do, he said. I want it for Saturday night. Stock the bar with Dom Perignon and invite the top local models. We need scenery. I pulled out my notepad, playing my role perfectly. Brad, I said, keeping my voice neutral. That is a $25,000 expense. How do I categorize this in the ledger? Brad laughed, leaning back against the railing and looking out at the skyline. Executive team building, Keisha, he said, smirking. And client acquisition. We need to look successful to be successful. Put it down as a marketing expense. I wrote it down. But more importantly, the phone in my pocket recorded every word. He was on tape authorizing the use of trust funds for a party on a boat. Later that afternoon, Tanisha joined us for lunch at a high-end steakhouse. Brad ordered the Wagyu beef and a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. I sat there drinking water, watching them gorge themselves on stolen money. Tanisha wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and looked at me. Her eyes were full of a toxic mixture of pity and triumph. You look tired, Keisha, she said. You have bags under your eyes. I have been working, I said simply. Handling the paperwork for Brad. Tanisha shook her head, reaching over to squeeze Brad's hand. That is your problem, sis, she said. You work too hard. You spent all those years in school getting degrees, studying late nights, and for what? To drive my husband around. Brad chuckled, slicing into his steak. Hey, do not knock it. Good help is hard to find. Tanisha laughed with him. I am just saying, Keisha. You did everything the hard way. You thought being smart and independent was the answer. But look at me. I barely finished community college. I never worked a 60-hour week in my life. And I am sitting here eating Wagyu while you are taking notes. She took a sip of wine and delivered the line that I would remember for the rest of my life. See, Keisha, hard work is for suckers. A smart woman does not build an empire. She marries one. You should have spent less time in the library and more time at the gym. Maybe then you would have found a Brad instead of ending up a spinster assistant. The table went quiet. The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. She wasn't just insulting my career. She was mocking my entire existence. She was validating her own laziness by tearing down my effort. I looked at her. I looked at the sister I used to tutor in math. The sister I used to buy clothes for when she was broke. You are right, Tanisha, I said, my voice steady. You definitely chose a path. I reached under the table and tapped the stop button on my phone. I had enough. I had the yacht rental. I had the insults. I had the admission that they viewed the money as a personal piggy bank. I stood up. "Where are you going?" Brad demanded, his mouth full of food. "We are not done. I need you to go to the jeweler. I want to upgrade my wedding ring." I looked at him. I looked at the grease on his chin. "I have to go file the tax forms," I lied. "If I do not get to the post office by 5, we lose the deduction." Brad waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. Go. But be back by 7. I need you to steam my suit for the party." I walked out of the restaurant. The valet brought the car around, but I told him to keep it. I called an Uber instead. I could not stand to be in that car for one more second. As I sat in the back of the taxi watching the city roll by, I put my headphones in and played back the recording. "Hard work is for suckers." I replayed it. "Hard work is for suckers." I smiled. A cold, dangerous smile. Tanisha was wrong. Hard work wasn't for suckers. Hard work was how you built a case. Hard work was how you gathered evidence. And hard work was exactly what was going to put handcuffs on her wrists in exactly 24 hours. They thought I was their servant. They thought I was beaten. They had no idea that while they were planning a party, I was planning a raid. The invite list for their yacht party was about to get some very unexpected guests, and I could not wait to see the look on Brad's face when he realized that his executive team-building exercise was actually a federal sting operation. Saturday night arrived, and with it came the spectacle of the Sovereign yacht lighting up the Chicago harbor like a floating diamond. From the pier where I stood in the shadows next to Henderson and a team of federal agents, the boat looked magnificent. But I knew better. It was not a celebration. It was a crime scene in motion. The music thumped across the water, a bass-heavy rhythm that vibrated in my chest. I could see figures moving on the top deck, silhouettes of people drinking, dancing, and laughing. They were spending my grandfather money on models who did not know his name and champagne that cost more than his medication. I adjusted the earpiece in my ear. One of the undercover agents was already on board, posing as a waiter. The audio feed was crystal clear. I could hear Brad's voice booming over the crowd. He sounded drunk on alcohol and drunk on power. He was holding court in the center of the VIP lounge. I imagined him standing there in his white tuxedo, looking down on everyone. In his mind, he was a giant. He was the new king of Chicago. The agent camera feed flickered onto the tablet Henderson was holding. There he was. The camera angle was low, looking up at him just as he wanted. He looked massive. He was gesturing wildly with a crystal flute of Dom Perignon. "You have to think big to be big," Brad was shouting to a group of potential investors who were actually just friends of his from the golf club. "The Prestige Auto Spa is not just a car wash. It is a lifestyle brand. And thanks to the strategic capital injection from the Vance Family Trust, we are fully funded. We are going global, boys." My father Desmond was standing next to him, nodding like a bobblehead doll. He looked flushed and sweaty. He was wearing a suit that was too young for him, trying desperately to fit into this new world Brad had created. "That is right," Desmond slurred. "We are making moves. The old way of doing business is over." Otis was a great man, but he was too conservative. He sat on money. We circulate it. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. They were erasing him. My grandfather was still breathing in a hospital bed 5 miles away, and they were already speaking about him in the past tense. They were burying him alive under a mountain of lies and ego. Tanisha breezed into the frame. She was wearing a silver dress that sparkled under the strobe lights. She draped herself over Brad's shoulder, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh. She looked radiant. She looked like she had won the lottery, and in her mind she had. She had traded her integrity for a yacht party, and she didn't seem to have a single regret. "Turn the music down," Brad yelled at the DJ. "Cut it. I want to make a toast. I want to make a..." The music died down. The chatter of the guests faded. The only sound was the lapping of the waves against the hull and the distant hum of the city. Brad climbed up onto a velvet bench, towering over everyone. He raised his glass high. The light caught the gold Rolex on his wrist, the same watch he had listed as a business expense on the federal forms I had handed to the FBI that morning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad bellowed, his voice echoing over the water, "I want to take a moment to honor the man who made tonight possible, Otis Vance." A few people murmured politely. Most of them didn't know who Otis was. They just raised their glasses because they wanted to keep drinking. "He is in the hospital right now," Brad continued, putting on a fake sad face that was more offensive than his joy. "He is fighting a hard battle. But we know that he would want us to be here. He would want us to celebrate the future. He is passing the torch tonight. He is fading out so we can shine." My mother Brenda stepped forward, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "To Otis," she said, her voice trembling with theatrical grief. "May he find peace. And may he know that his legacy is safe in our hands." "To Otis," the crowd echoed. "To the transition of power," Brad added, shouting over them. "To the new money." They drank. They tipped their heads back and swallowed the vintage champagne bought with stolen life support funds. They laughed. The DJ dropped the beat again, and the party exploded back into life. I watched it all from the cold, dark pier. I watched them dance. I watched them high-five. I watched the absolute moral rot of my family on full display. They truly believed they had gotten away with it. They thought the signature on the DNR form and the signature on the investment agreement were their tickets to freedom. They thought I was at home crying, or at the hospital mourning. They had no idea that I was standing 50 feet away, surrounded by 12 agents wearing tactical vests. Henderson looked at me. His face was grim. "Are you ready, Keisha?" he asked. "Once we cross that gangplank, there is no going back. This destroys the family reputation. It destroys everything." I looked at the screen one last time. I saw my father pouring another drink. I saw my sister dancing without a care in the world. I saw Brad kissing his Rolex. They destroyed the family the night they decided to kill him for cash. I said, my voice cold and steady. "I am just taking out the trash." I looked at the lead agent. "Execute the warrant," I said. The agent spoke into his radio. "All units move in. Secure the exits. Nobody leaves the boat." I stepped out of the shadows and onto the wooden planks of the pier. The sound of my heels was lost under the thumping music, but my presence was about to be felt. I walked toward the yacht, not as a victim, not as a daughter, but as the storm they never saw coming. The party was over. The hangover was about to begin. It was exactly 8 o'clock when the hammer fell. I was standing at the threshold of the main salon on the yacht, the cold wind from the harbor biting at my back, while the warmth of the party spilled out onto the deck. The bass from the speakers was vibrating through the floorboards, shaking the very foundation of the luxury vessel my family had rented with stolen blood money. Inside, they were gods. They were drinking vintage champagne and laughing at the world. But outside in the shadows, the real world had arrived, and it was wearing Kevlar vests. The lead FBI agent, a man named Miller, with eyes like flint, looked at his watch. He raised 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. He did not knock. There is no courtesy for embezzlers. He hit the double glass doors of the main cabin with the force of a battering ram. The heavy doors flew open, crashing against the interior walls with a violence that sounded like a gunshot. The noise cut through the thumping music instantly. "Federal agents! Everybody stay where you are!" The command roared through the room, amplified by the sudden silence as the DJ cut the sound. The transformation of the room was immediate and absolute. 1 second it was a palace of arrogance. The next it was a cage. 12 agents poured into the room, moving with the terrifying precision of a wolf pack. Their tactical lights sliced through the dim mood lighting, blinding the guests who were frozen in mid-motion. I watched as a tray of hors d'oeuvres slipped from a waiter hand and crashed to the floor, the sound of shattering china echoing in the terrified stillness. Brad was standing on the velvet dais, his arms still raised in a toast, his mouth open in a perfect circle of shock. The glass of Dom Perignon slipped from his fingers. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, hitting the floor and spraying foam over his Italian leather shoes. He didn't even notice. He was staring at the red laser dot dancing on the center of his chest. "Nobody move! Agent Miller!" bellowed again, stepping into the center of the room. "This vessel is now a crime scene under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." My mother, Brenda, clutched her pearl necklace, her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. She stumbled back, knocking into a side table. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an explanation, looking for anyone to blame but herself. My father, Desmond, simply sat down. He collapsed onto the nearest sofa, as if his legs had been cut out from under him. He knew. In that split second, he knew the gamble was lost. But the real blow was yet to come. The agents parted, creating a wide aisle down the center of the room. A hush fell over the crowd, a silence so deep and heavy that you could hear the water lapping against the hull outside. From the darkness of the deck emerged a figure. It wasn't me. It wasn't the police. It was a wheelchair. Attorney Henderson was pushing it, his face set in a grim mask of determination. And sitting in the chair wrapped in a thick wool blanket with a portable oxygen tank humming rhythmically beside him was Otis Vance, my grandfather. A collective gasp ripped through the room. It was a sound of pure horror. To them, he wasn't just a sick man, he was a ghost. He was the man whose death they had toasted 5 minutes ago. He was the man whose money was currently paying for the alcohol in their blood. Otis looked frail. His skin was pale and his hands trembled slightly on the armrests. The tube running to his nose hissed with every breath, but his eyes were wide open. They were not the eyes of a dying man. They were the eyes of a judge. They swept across the room, taking in the lavish decorations, the expensive clothes, the wasted wealth. He looked at my mother, who was now trembling so violently her jewelry rattled. He looked at my father, who had buried his face in his hands. He looked at Tanisha, who was trying to hide behind a decorative plant. And finally, he looked at Brad. Brad was shaking his head slowly, his lips moving in a silent denial. "No, no, you are supposed to be..." Henderson reached down and handed my grandfather a wireless microphone. Otis gripped it. His knuckles were white. He took a deep, jagged breath, the sound amplified by the speakers so everyone could hear the struggle of his lungs. He raised the microphone to his lips. "I am not dead yet, you vultures." The voice was weak, raspy, and broken, but the words hit with the force of a physical blow. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. "Otis," she whispered, stepping forward, her hands reaching out as if to embrace him. "Daddy, we were told..." "Stay back," Otis rasped. The microphone crackled. "Do not take another step, Brenda. You lost the right to call me Daddy when you signed that paper to turn off my machine." The crowd of guests began to whisper. They were backing away, trying to distance themselves from the family, trying to become invisible. They realized they were witnessing an execution, not of a body, but of a dynasty. "You gathered here to drink my liquor." Otis continued, his voice gaining strength from his anger. "You gathered here to spend the money I broke my back to earn. You stood there and toasted to my death because you were too lazy to work for your own life." He pointed a shaking finger at Brad. "And you, the CEO, the visionary." Brad swallowed hard. "Otis, please. It was an investment. We were trying to protect the estate. We did it for you. For me." Otis laughed, a dry, wheezing sound that chilled my blood. "You bought a watch for me, Brad. You leased a Porsche for me. You tried to kill me for a car wash, Brad." Otis turned his head and looked toward the door where I was standing. "Keisha, come here." I walked into the room. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked with my head high, the heels of my boots clicking on the floor. I walked past my sister, who wouldn't look at me. I walked past my mother, who was weeping into her hands. I stood beside my grandfather's chair and placed my hand on his shoulder. He covered my hand with his. His skin was paper thin, but his grip was real. "This is the only Vance in this room," Otis announced, his voice booming now. "The only one who tried to save me. The only one who didn't look at me and see a dollar sign." He looked up at Henderson. "Read it, Marcus." Henderson pulled a document from his briefcase. It was the paper they had signed last night. The confession. Agent Miller stepped forward, taking the document. He scanned it briefly and nodded. "Bradley Cunningham, Desmond Vance, Brenda Vance." Agent Miller said, his voice authoritative and bored. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement of trust funds, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." The words hung in the air. The reality of it crashed down on them. "No," Tanisha screamed, rushing forward. "No, you cannot do this. We are family. Grandpa, please, tell them to stop." "It was a mistake. We will give it back." "Give it back?" Otis asked softly. "Can you give me back the trust I had in you? Can you give me back the heart attack you caused? Can you give me back the fact that my own daughter wanted me dead for a handbag?" He shook his head slowly. "Take them away." The agents moved. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. It was efficient. It was humiliating. They grabbed Brad first. He tried to pull away, shouting about his lawyers, about his rights. They spun him around and slammed him against the velvet wall, cuffing his hands behind his back. The Rolex clattered against the handcuffs, a sound of poetic justice. My father stood up and offered his wrists silently. He was a broken man, a man who had followed his wife and son-in-law into ruin, and now had to pay the price. My mother fought. She screamed. She begged. She looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Keisha, help me. Tell them. Tell them you tricked us." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had called me jealous, the woman who had told me hard work was for suckers. "I didn't trick you, Mom," I said, my voice calm and cold. "I just gave you exactly what you wanted. You wanted the money tax-free. Well, housing in federal prison is free. You won't pay a dime." They dragged them out one by one. The guests watched in horrified fascination as the hosts of the party of the year were marched out in steel bracelets. The flashing lights of the police cars on the pier illuminated their faces as they were led down the gangplank. When the last of them was gone, the room fell silent again. The party was over. The floor was covered in spilled champagne and shattered glass. I looked down at my grandfather. He looked exhausted. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a profound sadness. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He took a deep breath of oxygen. "I am alive, Keisha," he whispered. "That is enough for now. Take me home. Not to the hospital. Take me to the house. I want to sleep in my own bed." "But the house," I started to say. "Is ours again," he said, closing his eyes. "It is ours." I stood up and grabbed the handles of his wheelchair. Henderson walked beside me as we made our way out of the yacht. We walked past the confused guests, past the stunned staff, past the ruins of a life built on greed. We walked out into the cold, clear night air. The sirens were fading in the distance, carrying away the toxicity that had poisoned our lives for so long. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of the lake and of exhaust fumes, but to me, it smelled like something else entirely. It smelled like freedom. I looked at the signet ring on my thumb. I had promised to bring handcuffs, and I had delivered. But as we loaded Otis into the accessible van, I realized the real victory wasn't the arrests. It was the fact that the man beside me was still breathing. We drove away from the marina, leaving the sovereign behind in the dark. The king had returned, and the usurpers were gone. The federal agents did not just arrest Brad, they dismantled him piece by piece right there on the deck of the yacht. Agent Miller stood over him while he knelt on the teak wood, his tuxedo pants stained with champagne and grease. Miller held up a tablet, reading the charges, with a voice devoid of any emotion. "Bradley Cunningham, you are being formally charged with 3 counts of federal wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial crimes against a protected person. Brad looked up, his face a mask of terror. The arrogance was gone. The CEO facade had crumbled, leaving behind a scared little boy who had played a game he did not understand. "Wait," Brad stammered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat on his brow. "You do not understand. It was a loan." Keisha said it was a loan. "We signed papers. It is a civil matter. You cannot arrest me for a business deal." Miller looked down at him with pure disdain. "We have the document you signed, Mr. Cunningham," Miller said. "In it, you explicitly listed personal luxury items as business expenses to evade federal taxes. That document, combined with the unauthorized transfer of funds across state lines, triggers the RICO statute. The district attorney is pushing for the maximum sentence given your history of bankruptcy fraud. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. 20 years." The words hung in the cold night air. Brad let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Keisha, please, tell them. You are the accountant. You know this is a mistake. I will pay it back. I will sell the watch. Just tell them to take the cuffs off." I stepped closer to him. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see the sister-in-law he had treated like a chauffeur. "I cannot help you, Brad," I said, my voice smooth and calm. "I am just a spinster assistant, remember? I do not have the authority to stop the FBI. Besides, you were right about one thing. You said you wanted to live a life of exclusivity. Well, federal prison is very exclusive. Only the worst of the worst get in." They hauled him up. He couldn't even walk. 2 agents had to drag him down the gangplank, his expensive Italian shoes scraping against the wood. He was wailing now, blaming everyone but himself, but nobody was listening. Next were my parents. They were huddled together near the railing, shivering in the wind. My mother Brenda was trying to fix her hair as if looking presentable would somehow save her from the law. My father Desmond looked like a ghost. He was staring at nothing, his mind likely replaying the moment he signed that DNR order. Agent Miller walked over to them. He did not read from a tablet this time. He gestured to Otis. "Your accuser is right here," Miller said. Otis rolled his wheelchair forward. The hum of his oxygen tank was the only sound in the stunned silence of the remaining guests. He looked at his son. He looked at the man he had raised, the man he had trusted with his life. "Why?" Otis asked. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "Was it not enough, Desmond? I gave you the house. I gave you the cars. I paid for every mistake you ever made. Why did you have to kill me?" Desmond shook his head, his lips trembling. "Dad, we didn't try to kill you. We just thought. The doctors said." "Stop lying!" Otis roared, his voice cracking. "Even now, at the end, you are a coward." Otis pulled out his phone. He held it up for them to see. "I have the video, Desmond. The hospital security cameras captured everything. But more importantly, I have the audio from my own phone. I recorded you in the room. I heard you tell Brenda to leave the pills. I heard you say it would look like natural causes." My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Her eyes darted around looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. "That is elder abuse in the first degree," Agent Miller stated. "Combined with grand larceny for the theft of the trust funds. You withheld life-saving medication to expedite an inheritance. That is a Class A felony." My mother lunged toward me. "Keisha," she shrieked, her voice hysterical. "You did this! You set us up! You tricked us into signing that confession! You are the evil one here! How can you do this to your own mother?" I looked at her. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a cold finality. "I did not trick you, Mom," I said. "I just gave you a choice. You could have used that money to save him. You could have paid the hospital. But you chose to buy a boat party instead. You signed your own confession because you were too greedy to pay taxes. I just provided the pen." "The officers, take them," Agent Miller commanded. The handcuffs clicked. The sound was sharp and final. My parents were led away, not like VIPs, but like common criminals. My father head hung low in shame, while my mother continued to scream threats and excuses until the door of the police van slammed shut, silencing her. Then there was Tanisha. My sister stood alone on the deck. She was not in handcuffs. She watched the police cars drive away, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. When she saw me looking at her, she straightened up. She wiped her face and forced a smile onto her lips. It was a shaky smile, but it was there. "Well," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I guess I am the last one standing." She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the deck. "They didn't arrest me, Keisha," she said, regaining some of her confidence. "I didn't sign the DNR, and I am not an officer of the company, so I didn't sign the tax fraud papers. I am just a beneficiary. I am innocent." I looked at her, the golden child, the one who had never faced a consequence in her life. "You are right, Tanisha," I said. "You are not going to jail." Tanisha let out a long breath, her shoulders relaxing. "Exactly. I am a victim here too. Brad lied to me. I had no idea what they were doing. I will probably have to stay at the main house for a while until this blows over. You can drive me there now." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. The audacity of this woman was truly something to behold. "Drive you there?" I asked. "Tanisha, you do not seem to understand the situation." I pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen 3 times. "I am the sole trustee of the Otis Vance estate," I explained, showing her the screen. "And as trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to cut costs." "What does that mean?" Tanisha asked, her smile faltering. "It means I just initiated a complete asset freeze," I said. I pointed to her purse. "That Amex Black card in your bag. Cancelled. The Visa Infinite. Cancelled. The gas card. Cancelled. Even your debit card, Tanisha. It is all linked to the family accounts, and those accounts are now frozen pending a federal investigation." Tanisha eyes widened. But I need to eat. I need to get home." "Home," I repeated. "Oh, you mean the apartment downtown? The one the trust pays the rent for?" I tapped the screen again. "I just terminated the lease. The landlord has been notified. You have 24 hours to vacate. And as for the main house," I held up a set of keys. "The keys to the estate. I am having the locks changed tonight. Dad gave me his keys before he got in the police car." Tanisha's face crumbled. She looked at the yacht, which was now being taped off by evidence teams. She looked at the empty pier. She looked at the dark water. "Keisha, you cannot do this," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I have nothing. I have no money. I have no job. I have nowhere to go. You cannot just leave me on the street." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had told me that hard work was for suckers. "You have your youth, Tanisha," I said, throwing her own words back at her. "And you have your freedom. That is more than Brad has right now." I turned to walk away. "Wait!" Tanisha screamed, grabbing my arm. "How am I supposed to survive? What am I supposed to do?" I pulled my arm away from her grip. I looked her up and down, taking in the designer dress and the expensive shoes. "I suggest you start walking," I said coldly. "And maybe tomorrow you can look for a job. I hear the diner is hiring waitresses." "It is hard work, Tanisha. But you know what they say. Hard work builds character." I turned my back on her. I walked down the gangplank to where Henderson and Otis were waiting by the van. I did not look back at my sister standing alone on the deck of the confiscated yacht, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a long, cold walk ahead of her. The golden child had finally lost her shine, and for the first time in her life, she was going to have to learn what it meant to be alone in the dark. The chaos on the pier was a symphony of destruction that I had composed note by note. Before I helped my grandfather into the van, I stood there for one final moment to watch the absolute collapse of the people who had tormented me for years. It was not enough to see them arrested. I needed to see who they really were when the money was gone and the walls were closing in. Brad was making a scene that was embarrassing even for a criminal. The agents had him pressed against the side of a black SUV. He was sweating profusely, his hair plastered to his forehead. He saw Tanisha standing near the police line, shivering and looking terrified. Instead of protecting his wife, instead of being the man he claimed to be, he turned on her with the viciousness of a trapped animal. It was her, Brad screamed, twisting his head to look at Agent Miller. It was Tanisha. She is the one who wanted the lifestyle. She is the one who pressured me. Tanisha's eyes went wide. She stepped back, her hands covering her mouth in shock. Brad, what are you saying? Tell them, Brad shouted, his voice cracking. Tell them how you cried about the house. Tell them how you said you would leave me if I did not get you that Cartier bracelet. I did this for you, Tanisha. I embezzled that money because you spend $5,000 a month on clothes. You are lying. Tanisha shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. You told me the business was real. You told me you were a genius. I am a victim here, Brad yelled as the agents forced his head down to put him in the car. She manipulated me. She is the beneficiary. Look at her bank accounts. She spent it all. Arrest her too. Do not just take me, take her. I watched my sister's face crumble. In 30 seconds, her husband had destroyed their marriage to try and shave a few months off his sentence. The love story she had bragged about, the power couple image she had thrown in my face, it was all a lie. He would sell her out for a pack of cigarettes if it came down to it. Tanisha stood alone on the concrete, weeping not for him, but for the realization that she had married a coward. Then it was my parents' turn. My father, Desmond, was trying to maintain some dignity, but he was failing. He looked old. He looked defeated. But my mother, Brenda, was a different story. As they led her past me, her shock turned into a blind, white-hot rage. She locked eyes with me, and for a second I thought she might actually lunge at me despite the handcuffs. You did this, she screamed, her voice echoing off the hull of the yacht. You ungrateful child. You set us up. I did not move. I stood my ground near a high-top table where a half-finished bottle of red wine had been left by a fleeing guest. We gave you life, Brenda yelled, struggling against the agent grip. We put a roof over your head. We tolerated your attitude, and this is how you repay us, by sending your own parents to prison. You are sick, Keisha. You are a monster. My father joined in, his voice shaking. You tricked us, Keisha. You told us it was legal. You told us to sign those papers. That is entrapment. No judge will convict us. You gamed the system. Entrapment implies I forced you. I said, my voice low, but carrying clearly over the wind. I did not force you to sign anything, Dad. I did not force you to buy a Porsche. I did not force you to starve your own father of medication. You played on our trust, Brenda spat. You knew we needed money. You knew we were desperate. You used our vulnerability against us. Vulnerability, I asked. You call greed vulnerability. I reached out and picked up a glass of wine that was sitting on the table. It was a rich, dark Cabernet, the same kind of wine my mother used to drink while she criticized my grades and mocked my career choices. I swirled the liquid in the glass, watching the red legs run down the side. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw two people who had never taken responsibility for a single action in their lives. They blamed the economy. They blamed the government. They blamed Grandpa. And now they were blaming me. I raised the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was dry and expensive. It tasted like victory. I lowered the glass and looked my mother dead in the eye. I did not set a trap, Mom, I said calmly. I did not dig a pit and push you in. I set the glass down with a sharp clink. I just handed you a rope, I said. I handed you a rope and I waited to see what you would do with it. You could have used it to pull Grandpa to safety. You could have used it to climb out of your debt honestly. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes hard as flint. But you didn't do that. You took the rope and you tied a noose. You put it around your own necks and you kick the chair away. Do not blame me for gravity, Mom. You hanged yourselves. Take them away, Agent Miller ordered. My mother's scream was cut short as the heavy door of the van slammed shut. My father's face disappeared behind the tinted glass. The flashing lights of the convoy painted the dock in chaotic bursts of red and blue. I stood there for a moment longer watching the taillights fade into the distance. The wind whipped my hair around my face, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The weight I had been carrying for 32 years, the weight of their expectations, their criticism, and their cruelty, was gone. They were no longer my parents. They were just inmates' numbers on a federal roster. I turned away from the empty yacht and walked toward the van where Otis was waiting. The wine left a lingering taste on my tongue. It was the best glass of wine I had ever had. 6 months later, I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse, watching the final act of the tragedy my family had written for themselves. The courtroom was cold and smelled of floor wax and misery. My grandfather Otis sat beside me in his wheelchair looking healthier than he had in years. His cheeks had color, and his breathing was steady thanks to the titanium valve now beating inside his chest. The judge, a stern woman with zero patience for white-collar crime, read the sentences with a rhythmic finality that sounded like a drumbeat. Bradley Cunningham, please rise. Brad stood up. He had lost 20 pounds in county jail. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a baggy orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Mr. Cunningham, due to the severity of the wire fraud and the calculated nature of the embezzlement targeting a vulnerable elder, I am sentencing you to 22 years in federal prison. Brad's knees buckled. His lawyer had to hold him up, but the judge was not finished. She had one more bomb to drop, one that wasn't in the legal briefs I had seen. Furthermore, the court acknowledges the statement from Mrs. Sarah Cunningham of Tampa, Florida, regarding unpaid child support for your 2 children. A gasp ripped through the courtroom. It did not come from me. It came from the gallery where Tanisha was sitting. Tanisha stood up, her hands trembling. "Who is Sarah? I am his wife." The judge looked over her glasses. "Sit down, ma'am." According to Florida records, Mr. Cunningham has been legally married to Sarah Cunningham for 7 years. His marriage to you, Tanisha Vance, was bigamy and is therefore null and void. I watched my sister's face turn ashen. The man she had worshipped, the man she had betrayed her own family for, wasn't just a thief. He was a liar who had a whole other life. All those business trips he took were not for meetings. They were to visit his real family. Tanisha wasn't the queen of an empire. She was just the mistress who paid the bills. Brad refused to look at her. He stared at the floor as the bailiffs cuffed him and dragged him out. Tanisha collapsed onto the bench, sobbing uncontrollably. She had lost her money, her home, and now her identity. The humiliation was total. Next came my parents. Desmond and Brenda Vance stood before the bench holding hands. They still tried to look dignified, but the illusion was gone. "You two are perhaps the most despicable of all," the judge said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You were entrusted with the care of a father, and you chose to treat him like a broken ATM. You withheld medication. You signed a death warrant for profit." My mother started to cry. "Your Honor, please. We were misled. We are good Christians." The judge slammed her gavel down. Silence. Good Christians do not starve their fathers. Desmond Vance and Brenda Vance, I sentence you both to 12 years in a federal correctional facility. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution to the Otis Vance Trust in the amount of $900,000. My father's head dropped. My mother screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of a woman who realized she would spend her golden years behind bars wearing a uniform. She despised eating food she hated, and following orders from guards she considered beneath her. As they were led away, my father looked back at me. For a second I saw a flicker of regret, but my mother refused to look. She kept her eyes forward, clinging to her victimhood until the very end. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Otis. "Let us go, Keisha," he said softly. "The trash is taken out." We walked out of the courthouse into the bright Chicago sunlight. It was spring now. The air was fresh and full of life. "Grandpa," I said as we waited for the accessible van, "I have been meaning to tell you something. About the surgery money." Otis looked at me smiling. "What about it?" "You know how Brad stole the cash," I said. "Well, he stole the liquidity, but he didn't know about the secondary policy." Otis chuckled. "The gap insurance." I nodded, smiling back. "Exactly. 5 years ago, when I set up the trust, I bought a high-premium health insurance rider specifically for catastrophic cardiac events. I paid the premiums out of my own pocket every month. Brad and Mom saw the cash in the trust and thought that was everything. They didn't know that the insurance company would have covered 80% of the surgery costs directly to the hospital." Otis shook his head, laughing. "So even if they hadn't stolen the money, I would have used the insurance I finished. The cash was just a buffer. They went to prison for stealing money that we didn't even technically need to touch. They destroyed their lives for nothing." Otis patted my hand. "That is the thing about greed, Keisha. It makes you blind." They were so focused on what they could take, they never stopped to look at what was already there. We got into the van. I looked out the window and saw Tanisha walking down the courthouse steps alone. She was wearing a faded coat and practical shoes. She looked older. She looked tired. She stopped at the bus stop, checking her pockets for change. I did not feel the urge to stop. I did not feel the urge to help. She had her youth, and she had her freedom, just like I told her. That was more than enough. "Drive," I told the driver. We pulled away, leaving the courthouse behind. My grandfather was alive. My conscience was clear. And for the first time in my life, the Vance family name meant something honorable again. We had pruned the dead branches, and now the tree could finally grow. I sit here today in the sun-drenched living room of the Vance estate, and for the first time in my life, the silence does not feel heavy. It feels peaceful. The ghost of my family expectations has finally been exorcised from these halls. My grandfather is out in the garden planting hydrangeas with hands that shake a little less every day. He is 80 years old, and he is starting over. And in a way, so am I. People often ask me if I feel guilty. They ask how a daughter could send her own parents to prison. They ask how a sister could leave her sibling on the street. They use words like duty and blood and obligation. They quote the Bible. They quote tradition. They tell me that family is everything. And I look them in the eye and I tell them they are right. Family is everything. But biology is not family. Biology is just a biological accident. It is a shared set of DNA sequences. It is similar nose shapes and predispositions to high blood pressure. That is not family. That is genetics. Family is loyalty. Family is the people who show up when you are in the hospital at 3 in the morning, not to check your bank account balance, but to hold your hand. Family is the people who respect your boundaries, not the ones who trample them in the name of entitlement. Family is the people who want you to succeed because they love you, not because they want a cut of the profits. By that definition, I did not destroy my family. I saved it. I saved the only family member who actually mattered. Since the trial, life has changed in ways I never imagined. I am now the sole managing trustee of the Vance estate. Without Brad's reckless spending and my parents' constant siphoning of funds, the business has stabilized. We are not just surviving, we are thriving. We have expanded the logistics fleet. We have hired people based on merit, not nepotism. We are building something that will last, not something that will be pawned for a quick payday. But making money is no longer my primary goal. Last month, using the funds that would have gone to Tanisha allowance and Brad legal fees, I launched a new initiative. It is called the Otis Vance Foundation. We specialize in providing legal and financial aid to elderly individuals who are being financially exploited by their relatives. We hire forensic accountants to trace stolen assets. We hire lawyers to draft protection orders. We help seniors reclaim their dignity and their independence from children who think inheritance is a birthright they can cash in early. Every day I read letters from people who are just like my grandfather was. They are scared. They are lonely. They are being gaslit by the very people they raised. They are told that they are burdens. They are told that they owe their children everything. They are told that saying no is a betrayal. And every day I write back to them. I tell them that they do not owe their abusers anything. I tell them that love is not a transaction. I tell them that it is okay to choose themselves. I see my story in their eyes. I see the pain of realizing that the people you love do not love you back, they only love what you can give them. It is a hard truth to swallow. It tastes like ash. But once you swallow it, once you digest it, you find a strength you never knew you had. I used to think that being a good daughter meant saying yes. I thought it meant swallowing my pride and opening my checkbook. I thought it meant enduring the insults and the disrespect, because that is what you do for family. I was wrong. Being a good daughter to my parents would have meant enabling their crimes. It would have meant letting them become murderers. By stopping them, I gave them the only thing that could possibly save their souls: consequences. They are in prison now. I do not visit. I do not write. I have blocked their numbers. Some people call that cold. I call it peace. I have learned that you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. You have to leave. You have to close the door and lock it. Tanisha is still out there somewhere. I heard she is working at a retail store in the suburbs. I heard she is living in a small studio apartment. I hope she is. I hope she is learning what it means to pay her own electric bill. I hope she is learning that pride does not pay the rent. Maybe one day she will understand. Maybe one day she will grow up. But that is not my project anymore. I am done raising grown adults. I look at the camera now and I see you. I know there are thousands of you watching this who feel that familiar knot in your stomach. You are dreading the next family gathering. You are staring at a phone screen afraid to answer a call from your mother or your brother because you know it is going to cost you something. It might cost you money. It might cost you your self-esteem. It might cost you your sanity. You tell yourself it is just how they are. You tell yourself you can handle it. You tell yourself it is better to keep the peace than to start a war. But I want you to ask yourself a question. The same question I asked myself in that hospital hallway. At what cost? If keeping the peace requires you to sacrifice your dignity, then it is not peace. It is submission. If being a good family member requires you to let them hurt you, then the definition is broken. Do not let the word family be a weapon they use to control you. Do not let the concept of filial piety blind you to the reality of abuse. Respect is earned. Loyalty is returned. Love is an action, not a word. If you are the scapegoat, if you are the ATM, if you are the punching bag, stand up. Cut the cord, change the locks, sign the papers. It will be the hardest thing you ever do. You will cry. You will doubt yourself. You will feel like the villain in their story. But you will be the hero in yours. My name is Keisha Vance. I am a granddaughter. I am a survivor. And I am finally free. If this story resonated with you, if you felt a spark of recognition in the darkness, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the person who is holding on too tight to people who are pulling them down. Let this be your sign. Let this be your permission slip. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to be happy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of my journey. And remember, the only people who get upset when you set boundaries are the ones who benefited from you having none. I am going to go outside now. My grandfather is waving at me. He wants to show me the first bloom on the hydrangea bush. It is blue. his favorite color. See you in the next video. Stay strong, stay smart, and never let them take your power. The most profound lesson from Keisha's journey is that family is defined by loyalty, not biology. Sharing DNA is not a license for abuse, and filial piety should never cost you your dignity. We often cling to toxic relationships out of obligation, fear, or tradition, but Keisha proves that setting boundaries is an act of survival, not betrayal. Real love protects, it does not exploit. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who raised you to save the person you have become. You are not responsible for carrying the baggage of those who refuse to heal. If this story gave you the courage to set boundaries in your own life, hit that subscribe button and share your truth in the comments. Remember, you are not alone, or not.